Good afternoon. Hello, and welcome to the National Book Festival from the Library of Congress. My name is Guy Labolinara, and I work at the library. I have the pleasure here of conversing for the next half hour with David Ignatius, prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post, who is also a novelist. And we'll be talking about his new novel, The Paladin, a spy novel. I should also mention that David has recorded a special video for the book festival, and you can find that video at nationalbookfestival.com. And once you get into the site, go to the genre fiction stage. There you will see David Ignatius's name, and you can watch his video and learn more about his writing and also about his work. Thank you so much, David, for joining us today.
It's really a pleasure to be able to speak with you and with readers in this period. We just love the thought that we may not be able to see our readers at bookstores, but to know they're out there and reading and listening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Tell us a little bit about The Paladin.
The Paladin is my 11th novel. It's the story of a CIA officer named Michael Dunn, who's asked to do something that he suspects, when he's given the order by his boss, may be illegal, but he does it anyway, which is pretty common, I suspect, in that line of work. He's asked to penetrate a journalistic organization in Italy, which is run by an American. CI rules say you're not supposed to interfere with journalists, but this organization is doing some very strange things. It's not simply disseminating what we call fake news, amplifying false information. It's creating events. It's creating what are known in the technology world as deep fakes, sound and imagery that doesn't exist in real life, but that is being created by this organization. So our hero, Michael Dunn, does his job, penetrates it, and then the operation gets caught up in a snarl that he doesn't understand. He's brought back for questioning by the FBI. He's indicted, convicted, sentenced to a year in prison. So the book opens with him being released from prison. We scroll back into the story of how he got there. And then by the middle of the book, as he understands what's been done to him, this is a story of revenge, of him trying to take down the people in the agency and outside, far beyond, who set him up and took him down.
The book is told as retrospective. How did you decide to tell it that way?
So I often like just a straightforward linear narrative. It begins in a certain time, ends in another time. Because I'm a journalist, from my first novel back in 1987, I would write a little date line, as we do at the top of a news story, where it would say September 27, Washington, D.C. And then the action in that chapter, that fragment of the story, would be in that time and place. And I found for this book that I wanted readers to be in different strands of time that started in different periods, but bent toward a center of the book, where all the strands of time, all the questions about Michael Dunn were resolved. And then in one single strand, pushing forward from that center of the book, tell a story in a linear way. It was a new way of telling a story for me. The reaction I've had from readers has been positive. So it gives me the feeling that if you write each slice of time coherently, readers will accept that shift in time. Think of the TV shows we love to see on television, Homeland, The Americans. Sometimes they start, they stop, they go backwards, forwards in time. Think about Breaking Bad, how many different slices of time you saw on the screen. It's a little bit of that technique in this novel.
I see. CIA, about the CIA, a CIA officer. Can you tell us how you did research into such a secretive organization? Did anyone at the CIA even talk to you?
Well, I say in the acknowledgments that yes, two key people, a former head of the Science and Technology Division, which is the part of the CIA where my hero Michael Dunn works, that builds the bugs and designs all of the kind of hardware that's part of espionage. That person talked to me, and somebody else in the agency who's very high up in their new Directorate of Science and Technology, Directorate of Digital Innovation, it's called, talked to me about this technology I was so interested in called deep fakes, the ability to create false sound and imagery, which is at the center of the story. So, yes, I did talk to them. In terms of the broad picture of the CIA, I've been writing spy novels now since the mid-1980s. I covered intelligence as a journalist before that, and I continuously write in my column for the Washington Post about intelligence issues. So in a sense, I'm always looking at that world, just getting little snapshots in my mind of personalities, of interesting issues. So there's a lot that I have to draw on just from my many years of writing about this.
This is a question that kind of follows along those same lines. Does the research for your thrillers ever end up informing your journalism?
Yes, it's often the other way around. So as a journalist, columnist now for several decades, I write often, as readers will know, about intelligence, but I typically have 750 words in which to tell my story. Sometimes I'll go longer if I have a lot of complicated reporting. But in those 750 words, you don't have time to really unpack a story, especially an intelligence spy story, in the detail and complication, subtlety that it has in real life. And also you have to come to a kind of conclusion. You have to tell readers at the end. So here's the point. Here's the policy recommendation. What I've loved about fiction through these 11 novels is that I get to let these stories be as complicated as they really are. I'm not prescriptive. These are not policy papers. The ambiguities, moral, political, personal, that are part of real intelligence work, I feel I can let speak in their real voices over 100,000 words. Typically is the length of one of my novels. So it's a very different kind of writing, but about the same underlying subject.
Looking back on when you were starting out as a journalist, did you know back then you wanted to also write novels?
No. So the truth of the matter about me is that I became a novelist. I don't want to say by accident, but I had a story that I wrote for the Wall Street Journal when I was Middle East correspondent. The story appeared in February 1983, and it said that the CIA for 10 years had run as an asset the intelligence chief of then our leading terrorist adversary, the PLO under Yasser Arafat. That asset, his name was Abu Hassan Salameh, had been killed in 1979, the year before I started covering the Middle East, by the Israelis, who regarded him, not without reason, as a terrorist. I learned that in some way that I didn't understand, this person was our man in the PLO. So I spent 2 years working on the story, finally appeared on the front page of the paper. Then, several months later, in April of 1983, the American embassy in Beirut was destroyed by a bomb, and all of the case officers who were then in Beirut were killed, along with the man who'd come to visit, who'd run this operation, Robert Ames. If viewers have seen a nonfiction book called The Good Spy, published a few years ago, it's the story of this man, Robert Ames. I knew this story. It was still raw. These operations were still going on. I'd written the journalistic version on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, but I knew so much more, especially after that bombing. And people came out just to really grieve to me, as someone who knew the story, tell me more about what had happened. So I thought there's no way I can do justice to this incredible story other than in fiction. I had to teach myself how to write a novel. The first couple of drafts, to be honest, were pretty bad. Finally sold it to the publisher that's still my publisher, W.W. Norton, and people ended up really liking it. It's a book that people still seem to read to this day. So that's the story of how I got into it. It was the last thing in the world I imagined that I'd do, or, to be honest, that I was very good at in the beginning.
Ah, great. You've written 11 novels, but one of them kind of sticks out for its subject matter, and that was in '99. You wrote a book called The Sun King, which has been described as kind of a Great Gatsby-esque work. What is the story behind your deviation there?
So I'd written a series of spy novels. I'd written a trilogy about the Middle East. I was very interested in French intelligence operations and the corruption woven through French life. I wrote a novel about that called A Firing Offense. I just began to be interested in telling a different kind of story that didn't conform to the limits, the genre limits of a spy novel. So I set out to write The Sun King, which is the story of a wealthy man who buys a newspaper in Washington. Easy for me to imagine the details of that because I worked for a newspaper in Washington. And it's a story of what we see by the end as a doomed love by a kind of buccaneer character who's had everything he wants in life except this woman he cherishes. It's a book that I'm very fond of. It's not often cited when people talk about my work. I once got a hilarious email from somebody who said, "Dear Mr. Ignatius, I read your book, Body of Lies, well-known spy novel made into a movie. I read your book, Body of Lies. On the strength of that, I bought your book, The Sun King. I want my money back." Meaning, this isn't a spy novel. I thought you were a spy novel. But it isn't a spy novel, but it's a book I'd love to have people check out. And anybody likes it, they can send me a note to the Washington and make me feel better after the note I got saying.
Do you think you'll write any more non-spy novels?
I don't know. At some point, I'm going to write my memoirs, and I'm going to put a lot of what I would put into a kind of real. Extended. I love political novels. I'm a great fan of Trollope, the Palliser novels. I've loved, but I feel that for me the format for that is a long memoir. I've spent so much time as a journalist in Washington, as a journalist exploring all these crazy secret stories. So unthreading those in a nonfiction book is what I want to do. I want to write another couple of spy novels before I sit down to do that. So, but in terms of a quote serious novel, real novel, I'm going to save that for a memoir.
Okay, you talked about Body of Lies being made into a Ridley Scott film. What was that experience like for you? Were you happy with the result?
I like Body of Lies a lot. It's a movie you can see on HBO. It's a Warner Brothers movie, easily accessible. Just watching an artist like Ridley Scott recreate this story in his own imagination, think of how to put it on the screen, what to cut, what to leave in. Watching a great actor like Leonardo DiCaprio, the hero of the novel. DiCaprio came over to my house in Washington. To this day, my 3 daughters are still appalled that I didn't invite them home to meet Leo.
Appalled.
Daddy, how could you? How could you not invite us? But so he came and he wanted to talk weirdly about how this character he plays moves through space. And he said, "Dear David, let me show you how he walks." Like you'd never think that would be the question an actor asks, but of course he's got to walk. He's got to inhabit the frame. So he showed me how he thought he walked, and he was sort of leaning back. His feet were slightly splayed. I said, "Leo, I don't think that's how he walked. He's a CIA officer in Amman, Jordan. It's a tense place. People don't lean back. It's not that loosey-goosey style in these Arab capitals. He'd walk on the balls of his feet. He'd be looking around. It'd be just more tense, more tightness." Yeah, I got it. So here's one of the best actors in the world walks across my living room again and does another 3 times. So that was really cool. The other star of the movie was Russell Crowe. And Russell Crowe, being from Australia, needs to get an accent for every American character he plays. That he's got to get it just right. Think about it, study it. So we had a lot of great discussions about something I hadn't really thought about in the novel, which is where does the character he plays come from in America? Does he come from Worcester, Massachusetts, or Russell Crowe said he comes from Arkansas. Okay, whatever you say. And then he gave me his best Arkansas accent. It was really good. It was good. So, that's the fun. Obviously, if you're a novelist, is this thing is lived in your head, and it's then it comes out in a book, and then it lives in other people's heads. It lives in the director's head, these actors. So that was I loved it, and I think it's a good movie.
Did you learn anything about the novel that you didn't know was even there when you saw it as a movie?
Yes, actually. I mean, there are connections that Ridley Scott made that I had not been consciously aware of. There are things that DiCaprio, Crow, and the person who stole the movie played the Jordanian intelligence chief, Hani Basha, a British actor named Mark Strong. And that they found things that I say, well, I wasn't consciously aware of. I'm a big believer that fiction comes out of your preconscious. You're not fully aware of everything that's in it, or the connections, or why these characters say the particular things they do, and you just have to defer to readers and reinterpreters who are processing it in their consciousness, and they make connections that you weren't aware of. And the idea that they don't have, in some way, those aren't valuable or right, I don't agree with. I think there's a weird way in which readers own a book as much as writers do when it's in their hands.
I have a question here about the CIA and the FBI and all the upheavals that they've gone through lately. Do you have any take on what the future might be for these agencies?
Well, they need to stop getting beaten up by the president, by the director of national intelligence, and be allowed to do their work. These are professionals. They take a lot of pride in the work they do. I'm told that they have continued, even in this difficult period, to do that job as professionally as they can. And when I say I'm told, people from foreign intelligence services who deal with them, you say, how are we doing anyway? How do you deal with the CIA? What's up with them? And you get a pretty positive account. I think what worries me is that people who are under attack, people who are labeled deep state, people whose motives are questioned, begin to get gun shy. They begin to get nervous about saying things directly. They begin to get nervous about their essential mission, which is to tell truth to power. And we've seen some intelligence agencies and officers pulling back from that, being more careful, sending less product to the White House, not wanting to testify in public before the congressional committees. And they're being careful. These are career people. They don't want to blow up their careers. But that worries me. They need, if we want them to tell the truth, we need to make sure that their professionalism is protected. And that's precisely what hasn't happened, unfortunately, in the last 4 years. It's been the opposite.
How would you say our global influence has changed over the past 4 years?
Well, we have, I don't want to be partisan. This is about books, not politics, but it's just going from the poll data that we see, we have a president and administration that the world mistrusts. We're pitied more than respected today in a way that I could never have imagined even a decade ago. People wonder what's wrong with America. I think that's going to have repercussions. One of the ways that our CIA and other intelligence services recruit people is the luster of our country, its reputation, the desire people have to, go to America, serve America's ideals, be part of the struggle that America symbolizes. And so obviously that's tarnished. That said, there's no intelligence organization in the world that comes close to the CIA. There's just nothing close. The Russians may be great at deception, manipulation. Heaven knows they're tying us up in knots. But in terms of global coverage, the ability to see places, be places, influence events, there's really no intelligence service like the CIA. And I think those capabilities are still there. I think they're carefully managed now. Thank goodness we have congressional oversight of intelligence. So the kind of really unethical behavior that sometimes occurred in the past, and there's less of. So in that sense, they can just get a restart, with more independence, more respect for their professionalism. I think the basics are still there.
Taking a look at our national security, what would you say are some of the greatest threats we're facing?
Well, so I'm going to give an answer that is becoming fairly common. The biggest threat to our country today is internal. Our political system's really broken, and we see that all around us. We see it in the polarization. We see it in the inability of Congress to pass legislation on issues that matter to the public, from immigration, guns, go down the list. Any issue people really care about, healthcare. So Congress isn't able to function, and those problems have to be fixed. There's nothing. I'm worried about China, which is a rapidly modernizing country. It's spending a lot of time and money on it, weapon systems, intelligence systems, but there's nothing that China is doing to us that's remotely as dangerous as what we're doing to ourselves. And, people just have to, and the only solution is in our democracy is our public, and taking control and putting in good leaders and holding them accountable. And that's the overriding national security threat. There are lots of others. I talked about China. I think understanding the nature of, we've never had an adversary like China. Soviet Union during the Cold War. I mean, did anybody really want to go live in the Soviet Union? No way. Did they challenge us economically? No, not in the least. But China is something different. China is an extraordinary economic technology superpower. And we're going to have to think over time, how do we live with that in a way that makes the world, makes our country better off, not worse.
How would you say your reporting gets incorporated in your novels, if at all?
Well, I think there's always a kind of bedrock of real life in my fiction. I hope so. I try to write real life spy novels. I don't the sort of James Bond shoot 'em up, agents drinking martinis and driving Aston Martins. I've never been very interested in that. A lot of intelligence work is like my business or journalism. It's slow, it's methodical, way that intelligence officers go about gaining the trust of people so that they'll share information that matters. It's very much like what journalists do, and it takes a while. And the play of personalities in establishing trust, and then the betrayals that happen in journalism, happen certainly in the intelligence business. Those have been the things that always interested me the most. I've tried in my novels to think about what the issues in technology or foreign policy will be when the book comes out. So, I wrote a book called The Director that I think anticipated some of the issues that we saw after the Edward Snowden affair. I wrote a novel called The Quantum Spy just before the Paladin. Quantum Spy was about the U.S.-Chinese competition to develop a quantum computer, a real life challenge. And then the Paladin, my newest novel, as I said, is about the deep fakes, the ability to create fake events, not just fake news, but more generally about the way in which the truth, these days you have to put quotation marks around the truth, because it's so easy to bend and manipulate and distort. That's what we're living through. And as a novelist, I wanted to find a way to engage it as a subject for fiction. So that's really the Paladin. In the end, is about the post-truth world that we're living in now.
Tell us a little bit about your writing life. You write for the Post, you write fiction as well. Do you have days where you only write for the Post, days where you only write fiction? How do you balance those two?
I do. I find that being totally immersed in the one or the other is essential to get to a level of concentration that's going to make it work. Famously, there are novelists who set aside 2 or 3 hours in the morning from 6 to 9, and they would kind of punch out the 1,000 words a day. I could never do that. I just couldn't compartmentalize my thinking. I've said in other forums that I'm convinced that writing is pre-conscious, that it's like what writes our novels is like what writes our dreams. What writes our sudden flights of imagination. It does just fall into your head. So you have to be in a place where that mysterious process, where the pre-conscious just flows into the conscious, flows through your fingers onto the keyboard and into the computer. Be in a place where that can happen, and I can't unless I really spend a day as I'm really kind of nearing the end of a book. It just takes over everything else. I try to somehow get 2 columns out a week. I hope the Post doesn't realize just how thin the reporting is, but it just eats up all the space in your brain, and just cope in those periods as best I can.
I have a question here from someone asking what you are currently working on. Can you give us a hint?
Well, I'm doing some writing right now for Hollywood, a project I'm really excited about that involves AI and the CIA. I'm working with a writing partner who's a terrific first-rate screenwriter. I probably shouldn't say. And a couple of other things that I'm writing. I'm just at the point of being about ready to begin serious work on a new novel. I wanted, in these COVID months, I didn't want to rush into something. I wanted to let myself think, take a deep breath, do a different kind of writing. As you can tell from everything I've said, I enjoy writing. I am not somebody who has a big writer's block. It's my pleasure. It's something I look forward to. It's my hobby in a weird way. So, but I don't want to start a book until I really have a sense of just what it's about. And I think in the last week I've got that. I'm not going to say any more about it because I don't want to jinx it. But we'll see. The gestation period, a year from now, if you and I should talk a year from now, talk with anybody who's watching us, I'd hope to be able to say, yeah, the book, that idea took. Sometimes they don't. But that idea took, and now I've got 50,000 words, let's say, and I hope I'll have it done in another 3 or 4 months. But that's how it gets started.
Tell us about the genesis of your novels. Do they start out with a plot you have in mind, or is it more an idea that you want to approach?
So I'll give you an example that's very current for me, and that's the Paladin. I had an idea of writing about this landscape of information war, information deception, the new technologies of manipulation, and that's what we've been living through really since 2016. So it was obviously current. I didn't want to just be rewriting the newspaper headlines, so I wanted a plot that was complicated and different. But the book really came to life when I saw my hero, Michael Dunn. I started my career as a reporter covering the Steelworkers Union in Pittsburgh and then covering the steel industry. So Michael Dunn, as I began to imagine him, is a product of that shattered Rust Belt world. He's from the Keysport, Pennsylvania, which is just up the Monongahela River from Pittsburgh. It's one of the steel towns that just got blown out when the American steel industry lost its footing. You go there now, it's like a ghost town. Michael Dunn goes home early in the book and he looks around at all the boarded up houses and he thinks that his hometown looks like a place that was defeated in a war. And, that Rust Belt anger, the sense of dispossession, read it in the wonderful J.D. Vance book, The Hillbilly Elegy. That's what animates Michael Dunn. He's got a big chip on his shoulder. He has that deep anger that we think of as typical of Trump voters. There's a line, there's nothing particularly political about this book, but there's a line drop that he voted for Trump, as a lot of people from that part of the world did. And that suddenly I saw this character. He interested me. He makes mistakes in this book of a personal nature that shatter his marriage and lead to some of the most painful scenes I've ever written as his marriage comes undone. That was a challenge for me to be able to write those scenes in a way that they were believable. So with this book, I had a lot of plot ideas to start with, but it was the characters in the end who that was the spark, and then poof, began to go.
Will we see Michael Dunn again?
So I like to start fresh. I like Michael Dunn a lot. He may come back. We'll see if Hollywood has any interest in him. But I like to start fresh with a new set of characters and template. There are two ways to go in these kinds of books, and I know reading Dan Silva's books, people love Gabriel Allon. They like coming back. They know him. So there's obviously an appeal that Jack Reacher, somebody that you get to know. And I just have never done it that way. But this is as close as I've come. I found there's a lot more I'd love to say about Michael Dunn. Maybe I'll come back to him. I think in this next book I'm going to again start with a different hero.
David, I'm so sorry to say this, but we have run out of time. But I want to thank you so much. This has been a delight talking to you. Thank you so much for talking about your work and spending time with us today.
Thanks, and thanks to everybody who keeps reading, keeps thinking. We writers are so grateful to you.